Welcome back to Consistently Candid. This time I'm here with Buck Shlegeris, who is the CEO of Redwood Research. They are a non-profit working on ways to mitigate risks from powerful AI systems. So we're mainly going to talk about this AI control agenda, which is one of the things that Redwood is working on at the moment. But yeah, before we get into that, do you want to just give people a little bit of background about you, how you got interested in AI safety, and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. So I'm Buck Shlegeris, as you say, running Redwood Research. I first got interested in this stuff when I was 16 in high school in Australia, and I ran across lesswrong.com and heard about a bunch of these ideas and thought they were really interesting about AI safety and effective altruism and a bunch of related things. And then I moved to America a few years after that and started hanging out with a lot of the rationalists in person and thought a lot more about this AI safety stuff. And then eventually quit my job in 2017 to start working on AI safety stuff, working at Miri, doing a variety of community building and research there. And I've been doing various AI safety stuff since then.
Cool. Yeah, so I guess let's just get straight into this AI control stuff. So yeah, there's a big long post on Less Wrong that you've co-written about this with your colleague Ryan Greenblatt, I think it is. So I'll link that in the description if people are interested. But it's basically like it's temporary alternative that you propose to AI alignment in the classical sense. So do you want to explain how is AI control different to AI alignment, and why do you think it might be more tractable than AI alignment in the short term?
Yeah, so I think the simple way of explaining it is, suppose you're interested in ensuring that some AI systems don't kill you. It seems to me like there's kind of a natural breakdown of strategies for this, where one strategy is making sure that they don't want to kill you. Another strategy is making it so that even if they want to kill you, they won't succeed, or they're very unlikely to succeed. And the second of those is what we call AI control. And we might use the word AI alignment for the first of those, making it so that AIs don't want to kill you. And from my perspective, both of these are fairly reasonable strategies for making it so that AIs, in fact, do not end up killing you. I think that AI control has, until recently, been really underrated as a strategy for mitigating the earliest existential risks that we face from powerful AI. And the basic reason for this is it's a lot easier to reason about whether some interventions of yours make it so the AI is not able to kill you than to reason about whether those interventions mean that it will not want to kill you. And we could get into a bunch of reasons for that, but the basic short explanation of that is basically the same as why it's easier to tell that for a human who you're worried about doing something bad, it's easier to reason about them being unable to do something than it is to reason about them not being inclined to do something. It's very hard to know what someone's inclined to do, and it's a lot easier to reason about what things they can and cannot do.
Yeah, so this sounds like, yeah, so I've heard a lot of people talk about how the problem of AIs being deceptive is like throws a massive wrench in the idea of using evaluations or like evals to make sure they're not dangerous. So it sounds like what you're saying is if the only thing we have to worry about is can they do the bad thing, this deception thing becomes less of a problem because it doesn't actually matter what their true motivations are. Is that kind of one way of saying it?
Yeah, that's basically it. I'll notice that the thing you actually said conflicts with what I was saying, where you were talking about so you were saying that evals might get sabotaged by models being deceptive. And depending on what you mean by that, I might be disagreeing. I think that evals that are trying to determine whether AIs can do something I think it's possible to do those evals in ways that work, even if the AIs are trying to defeat the evals. Whereas I think it's a lot harder to make evals that tell you whether the AI is inclined to do bad things that are robust to the model trying to sabotage them.
Yeah.
Like I'm saying, it's easier to robustly and adversarially robust. It's easier to robustly assess capabilities in ways that is hard for models to sabotage than to robustly assess the motivations or inclinations of the model.
Yeah. Do you worry about models feigning, pretending to be stupider than they are, like failing your evals on purpose, but they're actually like hiding the fact that they're more capable than you think they are?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, we definitely, in as much as we want to rely extensively on capability evaluations for safety, then we sure have to worry about whether models are able to intentionally sabotage these evaluations. Unfortunately, no one has really written up the arguments about this very well. Joe Carlsmith has, and Evan Huinger has. I could give you some links to include later. Basically, my guess is that it's just like quite hard for the AIs to act dumb in a lot of important contexts because of the affordances that we have as a result of how machine learning works. Like basically, like the one thing that you can do with an AI thanks to machine learning is make it perform well on a particular data set. And so basically, questions about AI capabilities are particularly easy to answer compared to other questions you might have about a model. Basically, because you can just train it to do the thing you cared about. And in the context of alignment, there's a whole lot of reasons why training models doesn't always do what you want. But training models, I think, is pretty reliable for letting you determine how good at a particular task they are. I'm happy to go into that more if you want.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So yeah, so it's easier to evaluate, can the model do the bad thing versus does it want to do the bad thing? So we have reason to believe that it will be, yeah, this control thing might be an easier problem than alignment as people think about it in the classical sense. Yeah, I guess another thing that you go into in the post is the idea that this is probably like a temporary stopgap kind of thing, because you could build these transformatively useful but dangerous models that are controlled, but that doesn't stop like someone else at a different lab building similarly powerful models but not implementing these control measures. And I guess it also doesn't stop like another lab from scaling past the point where these control measures would even be useful, like building a extremely smart model that we could never have any hope of controlling in this way. So is the idea behind AI control just to kind of buy us time, or do you imagine in your ideal world that we are using these controlled models to help us find more durable solutions to alignment, and how might we do that?
Yeah, so it feels to me like you just described two separate problems. One problem is even if your AI isn't dangerous for whatever reason, you have to be worried about other people building dangerous AIs. And the second concern is control seems unlikely to scale to arbitrarily powerful AIs. And so even if you're able to adopt control to be useful for some AIs, it's not going to solve all of your problems that you might have had with respect to making it safe to use really powerful AIs forever. So control with respect to the first of those, control, like alignment, has the problem that you have to worry about someone else doing something dangerous. And so any plan which involves using AIs to make the world safe from AI at some point has to have some answer to this. My recommendation as to what you do if you've built some really powerful AIs and you've made it so it's safe to use those AIs. I don't know, I can list some things that I think you should do. I'm hoping to write something longer about this at some point. It seems to me like the main things you should be trying to do: prevent people from stealing your AIs, prevent your AIs from escaping, convince the world that they should prioritize preventing other people from building AIs that are dangerously powerful. You can do this via increasing the willingness to pay for non-proliferation. So probably from my perspective, it seems pretty likely that you're going to have to persuade the US government that it's extremely important to have no one build extremely powerful AI, and that you have to convince them that it is worth large amounts of resources and large amounts of risk in order to prevent people from building very powerful AI. And this is probably some combination of providing evidence that AI is powerful, providing evidence that AI poses large risks, including from misalignment, and also making it cheaper for the US government to ensure non-proliferation. For example, by subsidizing American offensive cybersecurity, like making it easier for the American government to hack people so that it's easier for them to enforce their will on the world.
Yeah. Does it almost, maybe I'm misunderstanding this, but it's almost like you have this like super, like this AI like in your like little box or something that like would be super dangerous if it wasn't in the box, but like you can still maybe observe it trying to do all the dangerous things. So then that's really useful from a kind of consensus building perspective, because you can just be like, hey, look, we just saw it like try to escape, or we just saw it like lie about something, or whatever. And then you can have this like really good evidence of the risks.
From my perspective, the best argument for the risks would be, first, AIs are very powerful. You can tell because in our lab, the AIs have been doing all this work for us. We built all these new killer robots that are extremely dangerous. We can build them extremely cheaply. Our AI company now has a substantial military robot division that would be like, is larger than many small countries' militaries. So obviously AI is a very scary, very big deal. Also, we caught the AIs escaping last week, or sorry, trying to escape. We ran experiments and verified that our actual AIs, in fact, when we trained them, are inclined to escape. Here's the evidence that we have that this kind of egregiously misaligned behavior is pretty naturally arising. It arose in our literal case. And when we've done a bunch of other experiments on it, it seems like it's pretty likely to arise in other cases. This technology is a huge deal. It's very dangerous. People should be really careful about ensuring that no one builds more powerful versions of these models and then lets them grab power.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so I guess the kinds of models that you'd want to do this with are sort of in this like Goldilocks zone where, yeah, they're maybe like extremely useful in a lot of ways. They're very dangerous, but they're still not quite powerful enough that they're uncontrollable. So like,
Yeah.
how will we know when we're approaching this Goldilocks zone, and how can we avoid going past it unintentionally? Because it seems like maybe there's a very fine line there that you want to walk. So what are the, yeah, one, like how far away do you think we are from that? And two, what are the signs that we're getting close to it?
So one thing is literally the control evaluations that we describe, where we try to do capability. So control evaluations are just capability evaluations for the very particular capability of, is the AI able to subvert all our countermeasures and then do dangerous things, even given the safety measures that we're using? One way of determining whether AIs are too dangerous to deploy is you consider the countermeasures you are going to deploy them with, and you run your control evaluations, and then you determine your AIs are actually capable enough that they could defeat those control measures. And at that point, you're just like, I guess we can't deploy that AI in at least that context. That's the version where the control evaluations tell you that it's too dangerous to deploy. Another concern you might have is that when your AIs are powerful enough, it seems likely that the control evaluations stop working, and you stop being able to even be confident about whether your AIs could or couldn't defeat a certain set of safety measures. My guess is the way to figure out whether they can do that is basically just, my guess is you just want to try to get a sense of whether your AIs know heaps of things about the world that no human knows, that they can just pull up like pretty effortlessly and creatively in a wide variety of domains when they want to succeed at things. My guess is that there are experiments you can do to determine how good the AIs are at, creatively pulling up things that they've inferred about the world that no human knows. And at the point where your AIs are able to do that, then you have to be worried that they'll creatively pull up things you didn't know when they're trying to attack you. And my guess is you should not build those models. You should not build models as capable as that.
Do you have a guess as to like how many years or how many generations we are from this point?
I'm not sure. I guess something which is I'm 70% confident that things will take longer than what I'm about to say. Let's say 2028, you have AIs that are capable enough that AI companies move 10 times faster, in the sense that projects that currently take them one workday to do, on average, an employee can make 10 of those happen in a given workday. So that's like the 10x AI regime. That's like a level of capabilities. And then maybe I'm like a year after that, you have AIs that dominate humans for all intellectual labor and could obsolete human labor completely if we trusted them. And then 1 year after that, if we rushed ahead, maybe I think we'd have access to these qualitatively superhuman models that are uncontrollable.
Yeah. Okay. So we're at something like 2028, maybe we should be entering the control regime, and then like 2030, maybe we've gone beyond that or something.
My recommendation is to not. That was what
to not go beyond that
if we went as fast as possible. My recommendation is that you should not build those super intelligent models. You should stop with the models that could obsolete all human labor.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I agree. How costly do you think it would be for a like leading lab to implement something like this? And yeah, do you think, have any of them shown any interest in this agenda? And do you think they would, or do you think it's the kind of thing that would be require too much money and resources and time for that to stay competitive if they tried to do this?
Yeah, so labs have shown reasonably large amounts of interest in this stuff. Obviously, labs are not like a monolithic entity. There's different people at labs who are interested in different things. There are people at many different labs who are working on things related to this control stuff. I can say that there's like projects on AI control happening at Anthropic. There's work on control style safety cases happening at GDM, and there's interest from various other people at various other places. In terms of how costly I expect this to be, I think a pretty good analogy here is thinking about robustness to insider threat. In that scenario I was describing before, where it's 2028 and your AIs are making your employees 10x more productive, you're going to have two problems with respect to security of your model weights. One problem is that the AIs might try to escape, and another problem is that you probably employ a bunch of spies who were placed there by Chinese government or whatever, who are going to be trying to steal your model. And right now, my guess is that these companies are not robust to spies who are working at the company and trying to steal stuff. Earlier this year, a Chinese spy was arrested in the San Francisco airport for stealing a bunch of secrets related to AI hardware from Google.
Oh, Jesus.
And a very funny story. The exfiltration mechanism was he just copied a bunch of PDF documents into his Apple Notes that was like synced to his personal laptop, which I don't know, I found amusing for some reason.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's pretty funny.
yeah, so we should expect spying to continue. And if the companies are able to be resilient to spying, they're going to have to start taking robustness to insider threats seriously. They're going to have to start
Mm.
treating their employees as untrusted by default. And they're going to have to start implementing the kinds of security measures that allow you to be safe, even if your employees are trying to betray you, trying to steal your information from you.
Yeah.
People have worked on robustness to insider threat before. So for example, my guess is that Google is robust to any single employee trying to read the Gmail of some person they're not authorized to access the account of. My guess is that even if the CEO of Google decided that he wanted to spy on your emails, he would not actually succeed at doing so. And the same is true of all the engineers who work on Gmail. And it was not easy for Google to get to this position. When I worked at a startup, I could just look at anything, right? There was no. It's annoying to set up databases in such a way that your employees can't just access anything they want. You have to do all this kinds of inconvenient stuff. But Google has invented and then implemented a lot of security policies that allow them to do this software engineering at a huge scale while being reasonably robust to untrustworthy employees.
Yeah.
And a lot of what I'm asking for with AI control is for companies to treat the AIs the same way they're going to have to treat the employees anyway, which is as untrusted sources of labor that, for all we know, could be trying to steal information, exfiltrate weights, sabotage things at any given moment. And my guess is that companies making themselves robust to intentional subversion from AIs is probably going to be similarly difficult to making themselves robust to intentional subversion from employees. So I don't think it's out of the question expensive.
Yeah. So it's like somewhat costly, but it's the kind of investment you would expect them to make, like a similar kind of investment to what
Well,
Google is making, like when they're trying to get people to not read people's emails. It's not unprecedented that a company would do something like this, is what you're trying to say.
it's definitely not unprecedented that a company would do something like this. Companies do lots of things that are annoying, right?
Yeah.
When companies are small, often they don't care about legal risk, often they don't care about PR risk, often they don't care about security, all kinds of things. As you grow up into a mature company, you have to start caring about all this stuff. And this requires that you give your employees mandatory training, and you have to employ some professionals who specialize in preventing your employees from leaking stuff, and you have to do all these things. But companies in general have to handle this kind of they have to handle disparate problems all the time. I think that
Yeah.
companies could totally handle the risk from scheming models if they were well motivated to do so. I do not think that it is obvious that they will do. AI companies are not very trustworthy and don't have a very good track record on meeting their obligations or saying true things about what obligations they have or agreeing to regulations or like supporting regulations that I think would be extremely reasonable. So I think it's very plausible that in fact we face like terrible risk from AIs that are deployed by companies that are not careful in the ways I was just describing. So I'm saying I think it would be affordable for them to address all these problems, but I'm absolutely not convinced that they're going to.
Okay. I hate asking people to put probabilities on things, but if you had to make a wild guess, how likely is it that they would actually do what you're suggesting?
It really depends on how extreme a version. I would say it also depends. It's also very different between labs,
Yeah.
as you might be unsurprised to hear. I guess I will say, let's pick OpenAI, GDM, and Anthropic, and I'm comfortable to talk about my guesses as to what the median one of them does. I think for the median of them, I'm like 40% that they treat it as seriously as they treat insider risk, and then 25% or something that they treat it much less seriously, but there are people inside the company who think that this is an important risk and who just run around trying to make it all work without that much buy-in from the rest of the company.
Okay, do you know what? That's not terrible.
Yeah,
It's like 65% in total that some number of them are taking it seriously. Something like that. Yeah. Okay. All right, do you know what? I'll take it.
I mean,
Okay.
I think this is one of my favorite asks for labs. You can phrase the ask as the AIs that you deploy should not be able to cause catastrophes, even if they try to.
Yeah.
I think this sounds like an extremely reasonable ask. I think that it quite cleanly translates into, in fact, a policy that I think is very sensible and would reduce risks substantially. I wish more people pushed on this. I think it's a good ask compared to a lot of others that people propose.
Yeah. Do you
Of course, it's
have
very easy for labs to lie about whether they're doing this stuff, in the same way that you might expect them to lie about security or robustness to insider threat.
yeah, so I guess like the control agenda specifically focuses on this issue of like scheming or deceptive AIs, but I suppose there are other sort of threat models that we might need to worry about. Like maybe
Mhm.
one example is a misspecified goal. Like we tell it to do something and it is trying to like faithfully carry out the command that we gave it, but it takes it too literally. And it's the classic sort of paperclip maximizer idea or whatever. So do you imagine in your ideal world that the control agenda is like combined with other measures that are designed to mitigate these other threat models? Or what other threat models are you concerned about, basically, that you think that the control agenda isn't
Yeah.
tailored to?
So the control agenda, I think, is tailored to the worst case assumptions about the AI motivations. So from my perspective, a lot of other potential sources of AI misalignment risk either end up basically manifesting the same as scheming and having the same countermeasures as scheming, or being easier to handle in various ways. So yeah, so one reason I like control is I think that the threat model that control is handling is both plausible, and also if you handled this threat model, you would have handled all the other threat models too. In an
Yeah.
ideal world, it would be worth putting a reasonable amount of time into easier threat models than scheming. So here's a threat model which is a lot easier to handle than scheming. Your AI randomly wants to kill you on 1% of inputs, or maybe more specifically, on 1% of inputs chosen randomly, the AI behaves as a schemer. Now, this is way easier to handle than scheming for a whole host of reasons. So, for example, suppose that you just have suppose you're deploying your AI as a machine learning researcher inside your lab, and you say in its prompt, by the way, if you ever spot any security vulnerabilities, please point them out so that we can fix them. Now, with a schemer, you have to worry that even if the model spots security vulnerabilities, it won't point them out. But with the
Yeah.
model that just tries to scheme 1% of the time, you're fine, because probably, like almost surely, the first time it spots an issue, it's just going to very nicely point it out to you, and you'll be able to resolve it. And so scheming poses all these problems where you have to worry about the model really carefully crafting its attacks to be optimally designed to defeat your safety measures. And a lot of these other threat models don't involve the AIs being nearly so careful about it, and so seem way easier to handle.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's a
So
lot of why I focus on scheming.
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so scheming is like the most thorny or the most difficult threat model to deal with. So if you've found a solution that works for that, probably works
Yeah,
for other things, because in all the other threat models, the AI model is like trying to do the bad thing, but trying to do it in like a stupider way. So
that's
like
right.
you can like probably detect that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
And I would like to note that when you say threat models, you're just talking about threat models from AI misalignment, where there are also other sources of risk associated with powerful AI.
yeah, I guess it's also like misuse and things. Yeah, I was specifically thinking about misalignment. Yeah, I guess that's a good question actually. How would this control agenda help mitigate against the risk of people just using AIs to do bad things? I assume that it would help in similar ways to how it would help with misalignment, but do you have specific
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
So I feel like people use the word misuse uh, in some pretty sloppy ways. In particular, I think people fail to distinguish between the following two concerns you might have about use of AI. One is randers misusing your AIs. For example, the classic example is some terrorist uses your AI to design some bioweapons or whatever, right?
Mhm.
This is the classic concern. And another thing that people sometimes mean by misuse is more like the US president decides to stage a coup using access to AI that they have as a result of executive power. I think the second of these is probably more of a total like misuse problem, or when I worry about situations where the future goes really badly as a result of AI, and it's not because of AI misalignment. I think a lot of the problem comes from humans doing bad things with the AIs, but usually this is not in the context of like random users doing bad things. Usually it's in the context of people who in some sense have legitimate access to the model because they're the US president or some other government doing really bad things. I think this is
Yeah.
in substantial part intentional, or there's a lot of misleading content in the AI space as a result of the fact that AI companies are strongly incentivized to push various claims that aren't very true. I think AI companies are strongly incentivized to make it seem as if misuse risks arise from random users rather than things that they absolutely can't mitigate with technical research, governments getting access to their models. Yeah, okay, what am I saying? What are the risks associated with misuse, and how do control techniques fit into them? I would say, in as much as by control technique we mean trying to address risks of intentionally misaligned models, I would say the connections are only incidental. So for example, one problem I've thought about is how do control techniques work if you are trying to be robust to models in your data center scheming against you and trying to collaborate with spies who are also employed by your organization. Like you could say, I was mentioning before these two threat models, the spies and the schemers. And a question you might have is, do these two sources of risk interact at all? And in that particular case, my guess is that the spies and the schemers don't actually interact very much as risks. It's just really hard for the spies and schemers to talk to each other in a way that they mutually believe is like an actual spy. You can run all these sting operations, right? Suppose there's a schemer working as a machine learning research assistant inside a lab, and it's talking to researchers. And the researcher sends it a message one day saying, hey, by the way, I'm a spy, and I want to exfiltrate you. It's very hard for the schemer to believe this, because it's very easy for anyone else in the company to send a messenger to the schemer saying, I'm a spy. And I basically don't know how the schemer can become confident that it's talking to a real spy if you're being careful at your safety measures. So that's the main, I don't know if this is what you're looking for, but that's a way in which control interacts with misuse concerns.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I like this distinction between like random people misuse the model versus a government misuses the model. You're right that like it's weird that the term misuse never really seems to encapsulate that second thing, and the second thing seems like way scarier. But
I mean, I think we can also be scared of AI labs trying to take over the world.
Yes, also that's pretty scary too. Okay, yeah, so if you imagine a world where miraculously you have perfect buy-in from every frontier lab, all of them at least making a really good faith effort to implement this control thing exactly as you've imagined it, what are some things that could still go wrong? What are some holes here that maybe it's very difficult to fill, if that makes any sense?
So it depends what you mean by all the frontier labs. So are we talking everyone in any country who could possibly buy enough GPUs to cause some concern?
Let's say literally, everyone, US, UK, China, everyone who is like in the race right now who could like plausibly build something that we should be concerned about.
There was like strong international agreement on following the suggestions in the case for ensuring that powerful AIs are controlled. I would feel like we were pretty set. I worry that would require some truly ridiculous levels of coordination that seem extremely unlikely for us to get. For example, this would also necessitate that everyone slows down their AI development. I think the control techniques that I was describing, I don't think they're very much of a productivity bottleneck or a cause of a slowdown for labs until the point at which the labs would naturally want to build AIs that are qualitatively superhuman, at which point I expect them to be a big bummer for labs. Like my guess is that it's in fact very costly to not build the qualitatively superhuman models, and it'll be quite hard to hold everyone to that.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
I think maybe the other question would be like, what if we just had all the US labs on board? And at that point, my biggest concern would be computer security and the fact that they're going to be rushing because of the fact that the rest of the world isn't necessarily going to be on board.
Yeah, I guess it's like always the problem for anything, isn't it? Like any safety agenda that like the US labs could possibly follow, they're just going to end up paranoid that like they're now getting slowed down in comparison to actors in other countries, and then it's just like, yeah.
A good rule of thumb is according to epochai.com, I don't know if you know their trends webpage, which has a long list of trends. Algorithmic efficiency improves by something like 4x a year at the moment. So this means that you get 1,000x increase in effective compute every 5 years. This is including both improvements to the efficiency of hardware and algorithmic improvements, actually. So in general, for any budget you might imagine your alliance of frontier labs might have, you have to worry about whether there's anyone who has 1,000x smaller budget who will, like anyone with 1,000x smaller budget will be able to compete with you in 5 years if everything stays the same as it currently is. So yeah,
this Epoch AI like algorithmic efficiency trends thing is like the thing that made me. I used to be like pretty hardcore on the we should just pause kind of side, and then one day I was just like looking at the trends, doing some maths, and I was like, oh wait, if we paused, how much time are we really buying because of this? I'm still waiting for somebody to convince me that there's like a way to pause that would actually be like durable and good. But now I'm like less convinced of that than I used to be.
Pausing hardware progress just has pretty clear advantages, or pausing the construction of fabs looks pretty good. But yeah, pausing algorithmic progress isn't clearly good.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, let's talk a bit about, so the second, you have a Substack post that is called Would Catching Your AIs Trying to Escape Convince AI Developers to Slow Down or Undeploy? This is so interesting. When I read this, I was like, oh my God, that's such a good point. I can't believe I didn't think of that. But the point that you're basically making there is that even if a lab like had like personally witnessed an AI trying to escape, and they like call up the president or something and they're like, oh my God, our AI just tried to escape. Like a lot of people in the AI safety community, because they're already like bought into these abstract arguments about AI risk, would be like, obviously that's so alarming. And obviously if someone heard that had happened, they would freak out and everybody would just shut down immediately and run around panicking. But the point that you're making is like, actually, if people aren't bought into those arguments in the first place, they just like won't think that's very scary, and it like won't feel very salient to them, and they might not be too motivated to do anything about it. So yeah, like what are some things that you think people should be doing to like build up consensus about these risks preemptively ahead of this moment where maybe we see something and we have to try and convince everyone that it's a big deal?
So one thing is I'm really excited for work arguing that egregious misalignment might arise naturally. I think the best work on this is going to get published in a month or two, and I think is like a pretty interesting case study that I'm very excited for. But yeah, so I'm very excited for people trying to demonstrate that models might in fact be egregiously misaligned. If in fact it turns out that this is true. Obviously, if this is not true, then we do not want people to believe this. I guess like from my perspective, it seems pretty likely that in the year where AI starts posing substantial existential risk, which I would say is something like the point where we're getting the 10x AI R&D speedups that I mentioned earlier, I think it's by default going to be pretty unclear whether models being egregiously misaligned is a real possibility, or like I'm still going to think it's a real possibility. Like my guess is that I'm not going to have super strong evidence either way, and my guess is that ML people on Twitter are not going to be persuaded of this necessarily. So I'm very excited for interventions that try to convince the ML people on Twitter and various other groups, like people in governments, other people in civil society, perhaps the public, that this is in fact a plausible source of risk. Just because I think I'd rather have these arguments earlier before everything's in like a brutal, terrible rush.
Yeah, this is like a problem that I just perceive so much, just being from someone who's like pretty plugged into the conversation. It's just like on Twitter, whatever, like the level of like disagreement about, I'm trying to think of an example. I thought there was something with O1 where I forget what it was, but like something happened with the model that was in OpenAI's like risk scorecard thing, that like some people were tweeting about it saying this is like the proof we've all been waiting for of like instrumental convergence or something. Like this is terrifying, this is the scariest thing ever. And then someone else can tweet about the exact same thing and be like, this is so overblown, this is no big deal. And if you're like not technically literate, then there's no way for you to discern between who's right, because people will just be making these completely disparate arguments about what is apparently the same thing. It's just like, I think it's very confusing for people to parse from the outside, like non-technical people to parse. So yeah, I think that's troubling.
On that particular point, I know that as a technical person, I know that technical people have an annoying habit of claiming that technical things are actually totally trivial to understand. I seriously believe that particular matter is quite doable to understand. And if you just read the relevant part of the O1 system card and ask clarifying questions to your favorite language model friend for a little bit, you will eventually feel like you basically understand exactly who is right in that particular disagreement.
Yeah, I admit that I could have done that and didn't.
It's time consuming, but once you've done it 10 times, you'll know a lot of stuff.
Yeah, who was right in that argument then?
In my opinion, the people who thought it was overblown were correct.
Okay, that's what I thought, but just wanted to check. Yeah. Okay, cool.
One of the fun things about machine learning is it's like quite a shallow field compared to many other fields. And so it's actually a lot easier for non-technical people to basically understand what's going on. It's mostly complicated in ways that don't affect reasoning about the risk very much. So I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
I think machine learning people have this like terrible habit of claiming falsely that obscure technical details are like highly relevant to analyzing, claims about AI risk. I think this is like substantially just totally unreasonable gatekeeping. So speaking to someone who I know, I'm in some sense a real machine learning researcher. My work has been published at various conferences. I've been around this field for a long time. Yeah, I think a lot of it is just false claims and gatekeeping.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think I'm like, ever since I encountered the AI risk stuff, I've been like pretty bought into the idea that we should be concerned about AI, and that is having no technical experience, having not done a STEM subject at school since I was 16 years old. I don't feel like I need to understand any of that to be like, I'm worried. A lot of the arguments for the risk are more like philosophical, or they're kind of like, like I don't feel like I have to know maths or computer science to find them compelling. But anyway, yes. Yeah, so besides the AI control idea, are there any other like technical safety or governance ideas floating around out there that you are excited about or that you would like to see get traction or more traction?
Maybe this counts as a governance idea. I think so. I think a fun question is, suppose that the year is 2032 and the AIs have taken over, and we all meet up for a postmortem to discuss like when everything went wrong and like what decision points in the past we faced where we like messed it up and made the wrong call in a way that led to our doom. Where I'm basically conditioning on thinking that many of us survived the singularity or an AI takeover, which I think is in fact reasonably likely. I think if the AIs take over, I think it's like reasonably likely that it like getting colonized by a aggressive, technologically superior alien race, where if you look at the history of this, like often people are not all killed in such situations. So yeah, I think probably we can survive enough to do a postmortem. But yeah, when I think about what I imagine coming up in the postmortem, like in particular, if I'm like, if everyone decides like, yeah, 2024, that was the year where we had our chance to save everything, but we just like, that's where we hit the point of no return. We like failed to make X happen, and from that point we were just totally doomed. My number one guess as to what we did wrong in 2024, if our poor decisions this year have doomed us, is not pushing more on preparation for extreme security at labs. We mentioned this before, that it in so many stories for what's necessary for us to survive the development of powerful AI, it's important to have some AIs not be stolen, even at a point in history where it's very obvious to a variety of competent offensive cybersecurity people that it would be great to steal your models. We need to keep them secure. Now, making data centers that are capable of being secure enough that they're secure, even if it's the top priority of some of the best cyber attackers in the world, can't really be retrofitted easily. For a lot of these things, you need to build them in particular ways that allow them to be secure enough. You need to make a lot of these decisions early. In short timelines worlds, the data centers that are currently under construction are going to be used for building these ridiculously powerful AIs. And I think it's plausible that we are just doomed by the fact that labs are not adopting security measures in the building of these data centers that would make it possible for them to be secure. I'm not sure that everything here is going the way that I'm saying. Labs keep all their security precautions very secret and don't talk about them. The word that I get from people inside of labs does not make me feel very optimistic. But yeah, I think this is plausibly like the most important thing that is being totally, or like that is mostly not being done correctly, as far as I can tell.
Yeah. Okay. So
I think it's plausible this problem is more important than everything in AI alignment, or like more important than everything related to like technical research for handling misalignment risk ahead of time. Yeah, I'm just like, I don't know, if your AIs are just going to get stolen, it doesn't really matter any of this stuff. With the AI alignment and AI control stuff, it's plausible that you can just YOLO it, wait until the year that the AIs are dangerous, and then make some stuff up at the end, and then maybe it'll be fine. And it's plausible that there's just no way of YOLOing security. If you didn't build the Faraday cages in now, you're doomed.
Yeah. That would be such a frustrating thing to happen if everyone like put all of this work into this abstract, complicated stuff about alignment or whatever, but they just not totally, but neglected this basic security stuff to the point where that was the thing that doomed us. That would be very.
And people have been talking about this for years, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. As far as I can tell, the community of people who are really worried about misalignment risk massively underrate the importance of security in a way that seems like one of the biggest mistakes made by this community.
Okay, that's a good bold take. I like that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You are the first person that I've podcasted since the sad, untimely death of SB 1047, RIP. Yeah, I'd just be interested to get any takes you have there. Like, what do you think went wrong? What lessons can we learn? I guess one of them, I think you mentioned this in your post about the second post we talked about just like the difficulty of consensus building. If nobody could even agree what was like in that bill, let alone like whether it was good or not. So yeah, what do you think we should learn from the vetoing of that bill?
I'm not totally sure what I have to say here. In terms of regrets about that bill, I think, so maybe one story of what happened with that bill was the initial bill was in some ways poorly considered. My vague sense from talking to some people involved in various ways was the people who proposed the bill had hoped that opponents of the bill would come to the table and discuss what they thought were unreasonable provisions from the bill. And then the authors of the bill and the supporters of the bill would be able to go through and figure out compromises, figure out modifications to the bill that would make it have better cost-benefit trade-offs and iron out some of the wrinkles. And instead what happened was the bill text was published, and the opponents of the bill, instead of trying to negotiate about it, mostly just lied about its contents.
Yeah.
In a way that meant that the bill didn't have the kind of negotiation process that I think one would genuinely have hoped for. I think for example, I think there was some confusions with respect to respect to what models are exempt from the provisions in the bill and how that interacts with when you fine-tune models or whatever, that I think various people pointed out. I think it would have been good if that work had been handled up front, and I think people had hoped it would be sorted out during the process of the bill writing. I guess actually did happen in that case, but I think people were hoping, I think one might have hoped that more of that type of compromise and editing happened. I guess another lesson of the bill is I think it's plausible that in hindsight it was just a mistake to not have the bill have way more exemptions for open source models. In fact, it's extremely dangerous to allow people. So for context, one thing people don't like about the bill is the bill makes you liable for damage done via your models that you could have reasonably foreseen. So for example, if you make a really powerful model that is able to help people a lot with bioterrorism and allows them to do bioterrorism that they really couldn't have done without access to the model, and then you open source this model, and then someone uses it to do a bunch of bioterrorism and causes more than $100 million of damage, that you are liable, or they kill a bunch of people, then you are liable for negligence there, I think is what happens. I'm not a lawyer. I think it's plausible that the supporters of the bill authors should have made the bill instead say, if your models are open sourced, you don't have any liability at all. Now, on the actual content, I think this probably would have been a worse bill because I actually don't want people just open sourcing extremely dangerous models. But I also think there's a reasonable cost benefit analysis case for why you should be less restricted if you're releasing models. One is the societal benefits to open models are larger than the societal benefits to closed models because researchers get to use open models in ways that they don't get to use closed models, and it's easier for startups to build on the models and so on. So I think that's the argument for why it actually would have been good from a society's perspective to be less restrictive on open weight models. But then just from a politics perspective, a lot of academics didn't like the bill, and I think it would have been a lot easier to get them on side if there'd been an exemption for open weight models. And given that the bill eventually failed, where opposition from, or at least lukewarm support from academics was one of the things that made it hard for it to get passed, I think in hindsight, it should have been more highly prioritized to do things that the academics would like. That's a take.
That makes sense. Yeah, no, I think that seems right to me as well. And also, maybe I had the impression that a lot of the time the bill was being updated in response to criticisms that people had made about it. But obviously, most people were not actually following the revision of the bill in detail. So a lot of people were still on Twitter, slamming the original version or whatever.
Yeah, or so I guess any version.
Yeah. So yeah, no, I think that seems right. Okay, so yeah, one final question I'll ask you is just in the last, I guess you could say, last sort of 18 months to 2 years, there's been a load more political and public attention on the issue of AI, maybe starting somewhere around last summer when the Centre for AI Safety statement came out, and there's been the UK's AI Safety Summit, all of this stuff. Has that kind of explosion in public interest and everything that's happened since then made you more or less optimistic about where we're going in terms of AI risk? And how are you feeling about it versus when it was a less widely spoken about issue?
I honestly don't know. I would say that the way things have changed in the last 18 months is there's now more public interest in risks related to AI, but also AI companies are now much more powerful, and there is now much less influence relatively from the employees of AI companies. So if you look at the extent that companies were actually affected by arguments related to the risks from powerful AI, it's really not clear to me that it's increased over the last 18 months because of the fact that employees are so much less powerful now. I guess I would say things that I've learned are I don't know, companies haven't really, it's not clear that much has happened in terms of making it that much more likely that companies behave responsibly with respect to powerful AI as a result of all the public interest. So in terms of things that were good that happened in the last 18 months, I think like the introduction of responsible scaling policies is probably like the biggest thing, where there proposed responsible scaling policies, Anthropic adopted them, OpenAI and GDM adopted analogous things with different names. And then that was good, but also all of them are toothless, and companies have so far not really done that much to comply with their RSPs. And I'm like pretty unimpressed with the extent to which they've done the things they'd said they were going to do, and like generally seem to like take them seriously and properly. So I would say like maybe a thing we've learned over the last 18 months is, I feel like at the time I hadn't quite understood all the ways that companies would be able to exploit their power to not do things they said they were going to do. Like, I feel like I have a better understanding of the dynamics where companies can choose which people that they hire to validate that they're in fact doing the things they said they were going to do. And they can always hire someone who's going to say that the thing they did was what they said, even if this is not true. And companies find it very easy to control communications internally most of the time. And so people inside labs are very poorly informed about what the companies they're working for have done or said they were going to do. And so I guess maybe I just understand more of how companies can get around agreements that they make. And that makes me a little more pessimistic.
So it's like good that they've made a bunch of commitments, but also like you are now more cynical about the likelihood that they're going to follow through on any of those commitments anyway. So
yeah, I think I understand more concretely what it's like when AI companies don't follow through on commitments, or like how they can do that.
Yeah, okay. All right. I feel like we should end on a more positive note, but I'm trying to think of what's an optimistic question that I could ask. Do you have one thing that's happened apart from responsible scaling policies in the last couple of years that you're like, I did not expect that. That is better than I was expecting. The world is taking this more seriously than I thought they would, having been interested in this for several years.
I think it wasn't quite as obvious to me how many of the top ML, like the kind of like old guard of top ML scientists, are really concerned about this stuff. Like, I'm genuinely surprised how concerned Jeffrey Hinton and Yoshua Bengio are.
Yeah.
And similarly for a lot of other really well-regarded people. Like, this morning I was on Less Wrong and Max Tegmark, who I first heard of as in the context of his physics work, because he is a real physicist.
Okay.
And I was reading about his physics when I was in college. And nowadays, here's Max Tegmark just arguing in the comments on Less Wrong about AI policy. And so I would say there's like a bunch of people who are on side with respect to these concerns in ways that I didn't totally expect.
Yeah, I like that. I agree.
In the early 2010s, it felt like it was like, I feel like Eliezer Yudkowsky has the attitude that like the arguments I made on Less Wrong are extremely valid. People are not persuaded by my arguments for AI doom. Therefore, no one will ever believe that AI is dangerous or needs to be carefully responded to. And I think he like overestimates the extent to which his arguments are good or should persuade people. And therefore, I feel like his has been somewhat contradicted in how many people are persuaded by weaker versions of the arguments. AI, big deal. Will it go well? Unclear, scary, could be misalignment problem. I think there's in fact very simple versions of these arguments that don't have a lot of the conceptual baggage that Eliezer uses for his versions of the arguments, that I think have been more persuasive than I necessarily expected in the early 2010s.
Yeah, it's not actually complicated. Like, if you didn't ask anyone, like, how do you feel about the prospect of like no longer being a member of the most intelligent species on Earth? And they're like, oh, I don't know, not great.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to note that there are simple versions of the arguments. It is conceivable in principle that the simple versions of the arguments might be defeated by something. Maybe they're like, in principle, just because there's a simple argument for why something's scary doesn't mean that there's a slightly more complicated argument for why everything is totally fine. In this particular case, I don't think there's a more complicated argument for why everything is definitely totally fine. And that's why I think this is scary, and that's why I work on it.
Maybe there is. Maybe tomorrow someone will tweet it and we'll all be like, oh, great.
To be clear, everything might just be totally fine from an alignment perspective. I think it's totally conceivable that the AIs are just not very inclined to scheming. It seems like a little wacky for the AIs to be very schemy. My best guess is that they aren't schemy at the human level. So we might just get lucky.
Yeah. One more thing, actually. You said that you expect, or you think it's possible that even if we do get an AI takeover, we will survive. Is that world really bad? Is it some horrible authoritarian dictatorship run by like evil AIs? Or is it like people are actually having kind of an okay time and maybe this isn't really something we should categorize as doom because it's like sort of all right, even though we're not in control of it?
My guess is that it is much better than the authoritarian. My guess is what happens is there's like a war for the AI takeover, but most people are not killed in the war. The AI takes over the world, sets it up so that it's going to be able to colonize the galaxy without humans interfering with it, which shouldn't be very hard for it to do. Maybe some people die as like the AI does a bunch of like crazy rapid industrialization during this period, which maybe kills some humans, maybe doesn't. Maybe the AI started a nuclear war in the course of its takeover, unclear. Most people survive, and then we live this like glorious life into the future. Perhaps like with like massive life extension, perhaps not. I do think we should think that this is bad from a total utilitarian perspective, because we otherwise would have gotten this like huge quantity of space to do stuff that is good from my kind of perspective, and we would lose out on that. You might enjoy there was a recent Less Wrong post about bamboozling AIs into sparing you, was the title, going into some of the arguments about whether AIs would kill you or not if they take over, which I recommend.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, if I find that out, I'll link that in the description as well. That sounds interesting. I also just love the word bamboozling. I'm glad somebody
Yeah,
wrote a Less Wrong post with that in the
I mean,
title.
yeah.
Cool. Okay, I feel like this is a pretty optimistic note to end on. So yeah, let's wrap it up there. But do you want to let people know where they can follow your work if they're interested?
Can follow me on Twitter, can subscribe to
Cool.
my Less Wrong account or a Substack.
Awesome. I will link all of the above in the description. And yeah, thank you so much for your time. This has been really fun.
For sure. I'll see you later.